Excellent. So as the meeting will be, the talk will be recorded, and of course the speaker agreed on this. Well, it's a very a big pleasure to introduce the audience to the talk of Thomas BUGNYAR. Thomas is a professor in Vienna. Thomas, of course, is, I would say, in a way, an ornithologist, like me originally, but he's an ethologist, of course. Thomas BUGNYAR got a PhD in biological sciences in Vienna in 2000. Thomas worked as a fellow, Erwin Schrödinger fellow, in the United States at the University of Vermont, and then as a lecturer at the School of Psychology in St Andrews in Scotland, UK. Since 2008, he came back to Austria, and he got a very prestigious grant, a START prize, to pursue his research goals. And since 2013, he is full professor of cognitive ethology in the University of Vienna. I had the pleasure to meet personally Thomas, not many times, but a couple of important times. In one occasion, when I was invited to give a talk in Vienna in 2015, if I remember correctly, and when I had the opportunity to visit the facilities where he studies corvids in captivity, not only corvids, of course, but also in 2016, when he organized the European, together with other colleagues, Conference of Behavioral Biology, a wonderful conference, and also in Rome, when he came with his team of PhD students and postdoc students to bring to Vienna the marmosets that were housed at the Public Institute of Health for years in Rome, and he gave a wonderful talk there. So Thomas, what are Thomas' interests? What are Thomas' questions in animal behavior? Well, Thomas is, of course, as it was clear for the presentation from the mail I sent around in the social, etc., is of course interested in social behavior and the evolution of social behavior of complex cognitive abilities, complex cognition, with an integrative approach, of course, as is now recommended and is, of course, crucial. He combines concepts and methods of behavioral biology and comparative psychology. And his publications and his research is renowned for his long-term studies, so longitudinal studies on ravens under captive and field conditions, but also on other animals supposed to have high cognitive abilities, such as primates and parrots. The main questions he pursues are: which abilities do individuals require to solve problems in daily life together with others? And what types of mental representation underlie these abilities? And last, how are these skills acquired and transmitted? So I now leave the word to Thomas, but first I give a little translation, a short translation in Italiano. So, allora, grazie a tutti, tutta l'audience per essere presenti. Thomas viene dall'Università di Vienna. Thomas BUGNYAR ha avuto il suo dottorato in scienze biologiche a Vienna nel 2001, ha lavorato all'estero negli Stati Uniti, all'Università di Vermont e anche alla, diciamo nella Università di St. Andrews in Scozia, e dal 2008 è in Austria, a Vienna, dove ha cominciato con uno grant prestigioso, e dal 2013 è professore ordinario di etologia cognitiva all'Università di Vienna. Le principali questioni, i temi che affronta Thomas nella sua ricerca riguardano il comportamento sociale e l'evoluzione delle abilità cognitive complesse, con un approccio integrativo combinando metodi di biologia del comportamento, di etologia e di psicologia comparata. Ha effettuato, e questo di cui ci parlerà oggi, studi a lungo termine sui corvi imperiali, sia in condizioni controllate che in condizioni che in animali selvatici, e studia anche ovviamente altri animali con capacità cognitive complesse come primati e pappagalli, diciamo. Le questioni principali di Thomas riguardano le abilità con cui gli individui che gli individui utilizzano per la soluzione di problemi quotidiani, diciamo, nella vita giornaliera, ma nel contesto sociale, e quali rappresentazioni mentali sono alla base di queste capacità e come queste abilità, queste capacità sono acquisite anche ontogeneticamente e sono trasmesse, quindi trasformazione, trasferimento sociale di informazioni. Ok, so I leave you, lascio la parola a Thomas, I leave you the word. Thomas, thank you for being here, and please start your talk. And Thomas ha detto, I'm saying that you people could in theory interrupt you, but you can now start with your talk. I look forward to hearing this talk.
Yeah, thanks very much for this nice introduction, and thanks very much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here. So my first slide already is gone, so I can start with the second, which is actually about the talk's outlook. So what I'd like to do today is give you a very brief introduction about the theories of social intelligence and what aspects of evolution of cognition I'm actually interested in. And then I would like to give you some examples of current and previous research on ravens, and to then come to at the end to the more broad picture. I have to admit, quite some speculation there, and also give you some glimpse of ongoing projects and future plans. And I'm very happy for any kind of inputs, obviously, and please interrupt me at any time in case you have understanding problems or urgent questions. No problem at all. Okay, so I fear I cannot. Yeah, that's actually what I already found out. I don't know how to proceed with the slides now. No, it works. Okay. So it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s that people like Hans Kummer, Alison Jolly, and Nick Humphrey came up with the idea that social life is challenging from a cognitive perspective, challenging because individuals as intentional beings behave autonomously, which makes their behavior difficult to predict, and even worse, conspecifics also respond to being acted upon, which makes them difficult to manipulate in comparison to inanimate objects, for instance. And now the general assumption is of what's now called the social intelligence hypothesis, is that the more complex social life becomes, the better individuals need to become in coping with these type of problems. And this should then have an effect of their processing capacities and also effect on the neural substrate, basically the brain or certain areas of the brain. And even though this hypothesis is very intuitive, there's quite some debate about what constitutes complexity in social life and what types of processing capacities are actually selected for. And those are exactly the questions that I'm personally very much interested in. Now, the ideas of a social brain have been developed on primates and then has been applied to other mammalian taxa, for instance, social carnivores like hyenas or dolphins or elephants and so on. And quite some time ago now, actually, about 2 decades now, people have started to apply this theory also to some members of birds, in particular of parrots and corvids. So these are the individuals, so the species that are mostly tested in this respect. And the interesting thing here is that the last common ancestor between mammals and birds have lived around 300 million years ago. This means that if you find very similar social cognitive skills in particular mammal species and in particular bird species, it's very unlikely that it goes back to a common ancestor. It's much more likely that it's due to what we call a convergent evolution, meaning that certain selection pressures have favored certain mental skills. And for me personally, the cool thing on studying birds then is that we can test the theory that has been developed on primates more or less independently of phylogeny. Okay, so my main research subject in the birds is the common raven, Corvus corax, and those birds are, well, quite, I just want to say quite special, but that's actually not true. I mean, they're quite interesting, but they're typical corvids. They're interesting in the respect, so they're interesting, the features that tells them a little bit apart from other species in this taxonomic group is first, their worldwide distribution in the northern hemisphere. So they are super flexible in respect of where they live. So you can find them in the Arctic in the north down to the deserts in the south, in rural areas, in woodland areas, in the mountains, etc. They also have, this is actually typical for the whole taxonomic group, that they have rather big brains, and actually not only in relative size, but also in the actual neuron numbers, and the neuron numbers in those parts of the brain that are responsible for higher associations. And for the purpose of this talk, it's quite important that they do form affiliated social relationships that are comparable in respect to the quality of what we call social bonds in primates. And I would like to here point out the work by Orla Fraser, who actually did a PhD on studying the relationship quality in chimpanzees with Filippo Aureli and Gabriele, I guess. And I asked Orla then to do the same calculations on the basis of raven data. So I provided her the data and she ran the stats, and we found very, very similar results. So this is where this kind of statement comes from. Now, so far, so good. But then when you look at the so-called complexity in social life of ravens, then things become fuzzy or blurry, because what you can read in the literature is that there are basically two social classes. On the one hand, you have pairs that try to defend the territory for breeding. And on the other hand, you have those that don't breed, so you can call them non-breeders. And the non-breeders, they tend to form groups during foraging, and those groups have an open character, so individuals come and go, and they have basically been characterized as aggregations at food sources. So it's a food source that attracts individuals, and they independently come and go. Because of this kind of lack of complexity, people have argued that it's in corvids, it's particular the pair bond relationship that it has to be taken into account when it comes to cognition. And I totally believe that this is a very important part, which is also referred to sometimes as relationship intelligence, by the way. So I do think that this is an important part. I would not question this, but I also would like to point out that it's a little bit unfair to make such claims if nobody actually looks at the non-breeders, because this is here in this respect, we hardly know anything. And that's exactly why I focused on the non-breeder state in the last couple of years. So the research of my last 10, almost 15 years now was driven by two main objectives, actually. One was to determine the social structure of the Raven non-beta groups under field conditions. And the second one is to understand what the birds know about each other. So to test their social knowledge and also how they use the knowledge in daily life. And I would like to focus on those two objectives now and give you a kind of a summary result. So let's start with the first part, the structure of the non-beta groups. And here I would like to introduce you first to our field site, which is the valley of the River Alm in the northern Austrian Alps. And here in this valley, there is a small field station of the University of Vienna called the Konrad Lorenz Research Station. This research station has been founded by Lorenz himself and is opposite, or has been until recently, opposite to a small local zoo, the Cumberland Wildpark. And in this area of the zoo, you can, when you go there, you can see ravens, and you can see ravens actually on a regular basis, on a daily basis. And we have started a monitoring program on those birds in 2008. And so it's, which we go out there almost every day to have a look how many birds are around and who is around. And it turns out that across the year, you can find groups of ravens of 20 to 120 ravens. So the mean is around 50, 60 birds per day. And we then always calculate per year also the sex ratio and the age class distribution, and it's this is super stable. The sex ratio is pretty even, and in respect to the age classes, I would like to point out that it's not only the very young birds that are there. Actually, the very young birds make up only 20%. These are the juveniles from the first year. The majority are subadults, are still immature birds, but 2, 3, 4 years old. And then we have adults, and this is also a consistent pattern that about 20-25% per year are consisting of adults. And we have records from individuals now that are 10 to 15 years old and still in the non-beta groups. And if you actually take into account that the raven can get between 20 and 30 years under wild conditions, it seems that we can say that at least half of the time, if not longer, they do spend in the non-beta groups. So this is also something which is a little bit different to what you typically can read in the literature. But the pattern is super consistent across several years, at least in our study site. Now, Anna Brown was the first one who did a PhD on the wild ravens, and she looked at the group composition and could show that there are two different levels of so-called fission-fusion dynamics. And one level would be the dynamics that you can find during the day. So this basically means that ravens in the morning, they spread out for foraging. When then there are feeding events in the zoo, they form groups, they form bigger groups, and they spread out, they hang out in small groups or by themselves. And in the evening, they form a big group again for roosting. But in the second level would be then across the days. And here the ravens face the decision of staying at our place or going somewhere else. And surprisingly, it turned out that when you observe individual marked ravens, swing tags and colored rings and so over the years, then there are quite some who, so about 1/3 of our marked birds, who prefer to stay in our valley. So you can find them almost every day there. And so they seem to form a local subgroup. And this interpretation has then been confirmed by Matthias Loreto in his PhD, where he was the first time using GPS mounted tags, also GPS tags mounted by backpacks, sorry. Here you can see it on the bird. And this is the study of the first 10 GPS tagged birds, and the different lines, the different colored lines here represent different individuals. So different colors represent different individuals, and the lines show you where those individuals tend to hang out. And you can see that a lot of them hang out at our study site, but some of them also not only hang out at our study site, but also at different foraging sites. And they also not only meet at our foraging study site, but they also meet at those different foraging sites. So they have repeated encounters. Now, when we then zoom out a little bit, so this graph on the right here now would be this square here. And when we zoom out, and you can see how far those 10 ravens, 10 GPS tagged ravens tend to go within the time period of 3 years. And actually it was again surprising to us how big they can range. So the variation what they show was actually striking, because 2-3 individuals never left our valley in these 3 years. So they confirmed the pattern of a local subgroup. Some others tend to go in back and forth, but were staying rather in a small area. And others, again, they were actually covering big grounds, for instance, the brown guy or the blue guy. And you can see that they were not hanging out particular places, nor were they going randomly. So they were actually going from side to side and then spend. So they had short movement periods and then long periods of staying at a particular place. And when we have a look at what are those particular places, so these blurbs here, and you can use Google Earth to zoom in, or you can actually go there. In Austria, we went there. In Italy, down there, we used Google Earth. And it turned out that it was always these foraging sites of anthropogenic origin. So garbage dumps, composite sites, wild parks, skiing huts, and so on. So basically what the ravens were doing, they were going from one of those anthropogenic foraging sites to another one. And some of them had the preference for one, so they were staying there all the time. Some had preference for a few, and some had preference, so had basically no preference. They were going back and forth. So this was the first outcome. And in the meantime, we have elaborated our system, and we have now around 80 GPS-tagged birds flying around. I would like to show you an animation of the first 25 birds that we tagged in 2008. And this is now basically you can see the time running now. So you basically see, we'll see colored dots moving around, and each color represents again a different individual. And you can see the dots moving and then being still and moving and being still. So when they're still, this is night. When they're moving, this is day. And so this is how it looks like. Now it's night. Now it's day. Night, day. And I think so you get the idea. And now you can see that where in the night, you can see the roost, the sleeping sites. And so during the day, they either forage around its sleeping sites or they move to another site. This is when they do this jumping around. And now what we are interested currently is who is going where and who is meeting whom where, how often. This is what we're currently analyzing. And what we can already see quite nicely is that there's quite some movement between the different sites. And what you can also see quite nicely is seasonal differences. So we are now in October. Can you give you now an impression how things look like in the middle of winter, let's say January? So now we are in January. So night, day. Okay, actually this is not not the perfect example, to be honest. This is, oh, sorry, wait a second. I'm back in fall. This was fall again. This was not January. For whatever reason, it didn't work. So now I'm in January. No? Huh. Let's see. I tried once again because it's really nice to see the difference. Okay, here we go. So this is now the January situation, or the winter situation. And you see there's much less moving. So there's some movement during the day to go foraging and go back for roosting, but there's hardly any moving between the different roosts. And you can compare this with the spring situation again. So let's go to March. And this is completely different. So you can see that in March, there's much more exchange between the different foraging sites. So we do get seasonal effects in there, and we also have a look at them at the moment at different ecological factors. So what we try to understand is what causes ravens to switch between the different foraging sites, because some do a lot and some don't, and that's the big question at the moment. Okay, so then I would like to summarize this part in the following way, that the non-breeders do gather at food sources so that are typically of anthropogenic origin, at least in our area here in Middle Europe, in the Alps in Middle Europe. The groups do have an open character, as already known, but they are also structured. And I think this is an important thing to know. They are structured on the one hand by social relationships. I'm not going into detail about this yet here. And they're also structured by the degree of fission fusion dynamics. And the latter is in particular important because individuals seem to develop preferences for particular sites. At least some individuals do so, or a certain proportion of individuals do so. And in this way, they become local non-breeders that with very regular encounters. And the reason why this is so important is because when they have regular encounters, they have the opportunity to interact with each other on a regular basis and learn about each other. And this is the premise actually, or the basis of any kind of social cognition. So, and this has been, by the way, challenged, as at least I have been challenged for quite some time about, okay, hey, you are making big claims about the ravens and actually have a social system which is nuts. And I think here we can slowly begin to understand what's really going on. And it's much more diverse and much more elaborate as we thought. Okay, so then to the second part, the knowledge part. And here actually we are pursuing two main approaches. On the one hand, we are using acoustical communication as a means to study on their knowledge via playback experiments, mainly following being very much inspired by the seminal work of Dorothy Cheney and Robert Seyfert, which they conducted mainly on primates. And unlike Dorothy and Robert's work, who worked on wild primates mainly, we do our playback studies typically on captive birds and from our own captive colony, but also from ravens and zoos or private owners and so on. And the reason why we do so is because in this way we can control, we are very much in control of how much experience the birds have with other ravens. So we know exactly how long birds have been kept at which locations and how long it has been since they have met other ravens somewhere. So these kind of things were very useful for our type of questions. And the other approach is that we actually do behavioral studies on the wild birds in our study site in Grünau. And here we have habituated the birds to our presence and also the presence of our equipment. So we can really do very nice observations from close up. Okay, and to the results so far from the playback studies, we know that. So we used, first of all, we used a habituation dishabituation design to test if the birds can recognize the individual variation they have in many of their calls. And it turns out that they can very nicely pick up on this individual variation and that they can quickly learn to discriminate unfamiliar individuals. So that was a very nice basis. The second thing that we did was actually Markus Böcke, my first PhD student on the communication part. He played back the same as a particular, actually one of the standard calls of ravens. We call them rabbits, rap, 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 rap. And he was testing if the individuals could pick up on this individual information from formerly known birds. And those birds were either their friends or they were not their friends. And Markus was testing them 3 years after they have been separated. So, and after 3 years, they could perfectly discriminate. So this suggests that they have not only memory about individual ravens, but also about the relationship valence they had to those ravens. And finally, Joch Massner and Andreas Bachokonis helped me showing that the captive ravens can also respond to simulated rank changes. Suggesting that they have not only an understanding about their own relationship, but also about the rank relationship of other individuals. And altogether, these studies in captivity indicate that the ravens not only represent their own relationships, but also those of others. Now then the big question was, okay, this is aviary stuff, so how much does it relate to daily life conditions? And here would also be studying this, and we're using different contexts to look at this. And I will just pick out one now, namely social support. And we can actually have a look at two different types of social support: the passive one, where it's just the presence of an individual that actually affects already the behavior of others, or the active social support, where a third party is actually intervening in an ongoing conflict, as you can see here. So those two ravens fight, and the third party called bystander is actually now coming and supporting one of two, also attacking one of the two, and by default then supporting the other one. And it turned out that bonding status, this is actually what we were hoping for, and this was actually true, is that bonding status affects who gets help and by the third party when in those encounters. And it's the default actually is that the bystanders, when they don't have any relationship to those two individuals, then they help the aggressor and attack the victim. However, if they have a social relationship to an affiliate relationship or social bond to one of those, then they help the one who needs help. And then this could also be the victim. And the cool thing here is that the victims also utter, may also utter particular calls. We call them defensive calls. And they function to appease the aggressor, but they might also function to attract the audience. And to give you an idea actually how those calls sound like, so they actually are very short pulsed calls, and they might be given in a series. And this series could be just, or they could be, and actually the calls sound like this. So this guy is calling a lot. And now it was Georgia Siepel who in her PhD asked the question if the victims of aggression, so those guys here, can adjust the calling rate of those defensive calls to the audience, or actually to particular individuals in the audience. And her idea was that the victim should actually call more if he sees somebody in the audience who can support him. So potential affiliative individuals who could actually potentially help him or become an alliance partner here. However, he should actually not call or try to withhold from calling when he experiences an affiliative individual of the aggressor in the immediate audience. And this is exactly what we found. So this depicted in the right graph, you can see the number of calls the victim gives and under different social conditions. And the blue bars always refer to the situation where this particular social condition is not, this position or this particular social constellation is not present. And the pink bars show you that it is present. And you can see that now when it's about kin of the victim, when there is when there are close kin of the victim in the immediate audience, then the victims tend to call more as compared to when the kin is not present. Conversely, if they call less when the bonding partner of the aggressor is present, as compared to when no bonding partner of the aggressor is present. I have to add, though, that we couldn't find any pattern with the two alternative scenarios, namely when non-kin bonding partners of the victims are present or not, or whether or not kin of the aggressor is present. And then there was the question, obviously, why not here is to find any pattern here as well. And we think it's about the age structure of being a victim, or the likelihood of being a victim and the likelihood of being an aggressor. Typically, aggressors are older birds and victims are younger birds. And younger birds have typically siblings around and have typically very good relationships to those siblings that are around. Whereas older birds typically have no siblings around anymore, and they have quite strong bonding partners already. So it's not an exclusive interpretation; it's a post hoc interpretation, and it's in a post hoc interpretation. But we checked actually for these kind of things, and we could confirm it in the data sets. So it's still a post hoc interpretation, but I think at least it makes sense. And the ravens were responding. When they were responding exactly in the predicted direction. But the coolest part of all is that the ravens not only seem to, by the way, and then how can we interpret these kind of results? I think they confirm quite nicely what we have learned from the captivity studies, namely that the ravens represent their own relationships. So when their own kin are around, the increased calling, and they also may represent others' relationships. So when the others' allies are around, the decreased calling. So this was pretty good. And the coolest thing is that they not only seem to represent others' relationship, but they also try to manipulate them. And so what we could also find is that, or observe is that ravens intervene not only in conflicts, so in agonistic interactions, but also in affiliative interactions. And so you can see here, for instance, this is such an affiliation bout. Here, this guy with the green marking is preening, so giving the other one giving him a massage. And those two ravens in the front, they are playing with an object, for instance. So 2 times affiliative interactions. And what then could happen, and actually which happens quite frequently, is that a third individual comes and intervenes here and makes them stop affiliating. And it turns out that bonding status affects who shows and also who gets those interventions. So first of all, who shows those interventions, who is the bystander, and these are typically all the birds. All the birds that are strongly bonded themselves and socially very well integrated up high in the dominance hierarchy. Those that get the interventions are not birds that are just preening, but they do it selectively with birds that are affiliating consecutively, so repeatedly over time, and most important, reciprocally. And those are exactly the 2 measures that we personally use to calculate bonds or bonding relationships. And it seems that ravens do so too, because they only target individuals if they have done this for at least over the course of a month and in a reciprocal version. If they don't do it in this way, they don't care. And yeah, so then I can actually sum up this part, that what I haven't shown you, I have to admit, is that when birds form a bond, a strong bond with reciprocal exchange of favors, then this makes them increase in status and rank. So they immediately win quite a lot of more conflicts, not only because the other one is helping, but just because the other one is present already. So this effect we can show quite nicely under field conditions. So given that bonding leads to an increase in status and rank, we can also show now that bonding also leads to an increase of aggression received by others. And these interventions in these affiliative interactions by others may function to prevent those individuals that do the affiliative interactions from forming and or maintaining their bonds. So we actually think that those that are intervening try to break those up and try to prevent them from becoming very close, which would mean that they could potentially become competitors in the near future. And so I think that these kind of observations again support the idea that ravens are aware of other social bonds. In this case, not the dominance rank, but also the affiliative relations or social bonds, and that they actually try to manipulate this and per definition doing politics, if you want to. Coming back to the overall argument with which I started, namely that what's the complexity in raven social life, I think it's quite safe in the meantime to conclude that the role of social bonds has been completely underestimated in those birds and seem to be a key feature, at least in the raven non-breeder groups. So, but now let's, so much to the empirical results from the last couple of years, now from the field. Now let's take a step back and think about, okay, what type of cognition can we actually talk about here? And I think here it's important to consider what are the goals of individuals that are interacting, that show social interactions. If those goals are opposing, then it might lead, or it's very likely, so actually the consequence should be that the individuals are trying to outwit each other. And this should then lead to things like third-party knowledge and political maneuvers, as I've just described, but also it has been suggested that it might lead to high cognitive skills like perspective taking or forms of theory of mind. And altogether, these kind of skills have been referred to as Machiavellian intelligence, basically. On the other hand, you can argue that interactions partners may have shared goals. And in this case, what you would expect is that those individuals are good in coordinating and or cooperating in several tasks, potentially even evolve or develop what's called a shared intentionality, or things like other regard and caring for others and empathy or empathy-like skills. And this type of cognitive skill set is typically referred to as cooperative versions of intelligence, or Vygotsky mind, cultural intelligence, and so far. And some people have also argued that those two types of intelligences, if you want to, are actually two sides of the same coin, and this coin actually may be referred to as G, or for general intelligence. And so now the question now is for me, okay, how do the ravens fit into this scenario? And when it's about the individuals that are interacting, having opposing goals, I think we have quite good evidence that this is what ravens do. I told you about the party knowledge and politics before, and we have, my previous work has focused very much on the more cognitive aspects, in particular perspective taking and theory of mind like skills, which revealed actually quite positive results as well. And the whole thing was kickstarted by observations that ravens, when they catch food, that they when they see somebody else close by, that they stop, either retrieve the food and or use obstacles if possible so actually go behind obstacles to consume caching behind them, so that the obstacles obstruct the view of a potential pilferer. And you could interpret this behavior as perspective taking, so that the bird knows what the other one can or cannot see. But you can also interpret it in a way that the bird is just taking their own perspective, namely it is applying a learned rule. So don't cache as long as you can see another conspecific. So he doesn't cache in this case here, but when he is walking over there and he doesn't see anybody anymore, he feels safe and resumes caching. So these were the kind of issues that we have. Just 1 second. These were the kind of issues that we faced here. So we ran a series of experiments actually trying to tease apart these alternative scenarios. And the last one was then I would say, very elegant experiment, which was inspired by a colleague of mine, Cameron BUGNYAR. He's a philosopher of mind from the States. And so what we did in this experiment is that we put ravens in captivity now in a rather small room, and the focal subject always got a highly preferred food of an amount he cannot eat, so that the likelihood decided it's going to cache. And so we gave him a certain amount of time, 4 minutes, which he had to deal with the situation. And important, there was always in the adjacent room, there were always other ravens, and there were two main conditions. In one condition, that the separation wall was transparent, so we may call those conspecifics over there observers. And in the other condition, the partition wall was opaque. We pulled down a curtain, and so the conspecifics were considered to be non-observers. Importantly, after these caching sessions, I always opened the door, and the competitors, either observer or non-observers, could go into the room and search for the food. So the task of the focal subject was, okay, now what to do? You have extra surplus food, you cannot eat everything, you should cache it. So, but how to do that? And we were expecting to find differences in caching behavior between those two conditions, observer, non-observer conditions. And this was indeed the case. So this was not something spectacular at that time. However, what we also did is that we introduced another condition as probe trials. And in those conditions, we opened a peephole, a small peephole in the otherwise opaque wall. And before we ran those probe trials, I showed each raven individually that there is so how the peephole works from their perspective. So I went in, opened, and put some food on the other side, and they were looking, make sure that they were looking through that, so that I knew that they can look through from this side to the other one. So this is what all new. And then in the test, what we started out with a non-observer condition. I went in, opened the peephole, and then to also simulate that there are conspecifics on the other side, we were playing back the noises which we recorded in the non-observer condition. So there was no other raven around which they could pick up on through the peephole, so it could be that they see their feet or whatever. So this is what we tried to avoid. So there was no raven around, but we simulated the presence acoustically. So, and then the question was, how do the ravens cache the food here? Do they cache it similarly as in the observer condition or as in the non-observer condition? If they would have anything like a theory of mind, then, or let's put it this way, they have a representation. If our playback stimulates a mental representation of a conspecific in the other room. And if they could take their own experience, that they could look through the people in the other room, and they could potentially predict also, okay, if I can see through, the other one can see through too, then they should cache in this condition similar as in the observed compared to the non-observed condition. And that was exactly the case from trial 1 on. So this was actually a very strong evidence that there are some aspects or elements of theory of mind present already in the birds. Okay, now let's focus on the other part, the cooperative side. So one of my postdocs, Joach Massen, he ran a couple of cooperation tasks involving, for instance, the loose string paradigm, where two individuals have to simultaneously pull on the string to get food into reach. And the ravens can learn this very quickly. However, when we did the first probe trials for understanding, like a delay task, so let's say one has access to the platform and the other one access was blocked, so that this guy has to wait for the other one to come, they failed. However, it's turned out when we gave them another problem, the same setting, but in a slightly different version, so where we actually were testing for partner choice. So this individual here in the middle could choose with whom to pull pull on the string. One was a friend, the other one was a non-friend. They were sure picking their friend first. And then it turned out that if the other one, the not chosen one, could wait, the focus subject could still come over and pull together with him too, what they did. And in those conditions, the birds were capable of waiting up to several minutes. But they had to learn this. They couldn't do this from the very beginning, so they had to figure it out. But it's not that they cannot do it; it's just that they don't do it from instantly in this setting at least. That was the difference to caching, and I think in respect to caching, they have so much experience from daily life which you could easily use into the experimental conditions, whereas in this setting, they obviously couldn't do so. Okay, then in respect to other skills, shared intentionality is something which I haven't touched at all, but we were testing, or at least Joach was testing, a lot in respect to other regard with so-so results, are actually very depressing results. So we actually showed a lot of instances of, we could confirm that ravens show a lot of pro-social behavior, but we don't have very good evidence that they actually the underlying mechanism is based on other regard. So we think that other things are going on here. In respect to empathy, though, when we break this up into smaller pieces, and let's go for emotional contagion as a basis, we have quite good evidence, and experimentally, observationally, and so forth. And the best study so far was the one from Jesse Adrians, a PhD student, and this study was conducted together with a colleague of mine in Vienna from psychology, Klaus Lamm. And what we did here is that we were interested in the emotional state of the observer, who could observe a model bird, another conspecific, in this case an affiliative conspecific, who's expressing behaviors that are either of positive or negative valence. And the way we manipulated this is that he could look through a peephole here and see two food pieces, and then there came a human experiment and took one of the two food pieces away, and the other one was eventually given to the model bird. So if the human took away the vegetable, then the model bird here showed a lot of behavioral signs of joy or anticipation. So he was very much looking forward to eventually receive the meat. And however, when the experimenter took away the meat and left the veggie, then the model bird showed several behaviors that we would refer to as frustration. So for sure, negative valence. So the behavioral responses were very, very different. And then the question was, can the observer bird pick up on the behavior from the behaviors on the emotional valence and show emotional contagion? And to test this, we ran cognitive bias tests before and after this demonstration. And so what we basically did for this is, what we did for this is that we trained the birds that particular location, let's say left, is positive. When there's a cup on the left side, go for it, because under it you can find the reward. But if it's on the right side, you shouldn't go there because it's empty. And so they have learned this, and that's easy, this task. So we do some trials, and then we give them in between the probe trial where the Q is ambiguous. So we put the cup in the middle. And then the question is, do they go there quickly or don't they go there at all? And so the idea is if they are in a positive emotional state, then they should be optimistically and treat this ambiguous Q like a positive, or the way around when they're in the negative emotional state. And it turned out that this is working quite well. And after observing a model bird in frustration, the birds showed a much more negative or pessimistic judgment of those ambiguous cues in the second test after they have seen it as compared to before. So this suggests that this kind of emotional contagion, this quick one, is indeed working. We have in the meantime also quite good evidence from other contexts, also in the positive context. So then to sum up, in respect to this kind of cooperative part of intelligence, the results are mixed. We sometimes find things, sometimes we don't, sometimes we find strong learning curves. So it's not as clear-cut as we see it on the Machiavellian side. So if we now go back and put in now the Raven life cycle, or the different life stages, I think then the picture becomes even more clear, or a little bit clearer, not even more, but a little bit clearer. Because they start out in the family, so they grow up with their parents, stay a couple of months with the parents, and then leave and join the non-breeder groups. And in those non-breeder groups, they stay several years. And in those non-breeder groups, there's quite some competition for resources, for status, for mates, and so on. So here, I think this Machiavellian part is inserting a strong pressure. And that's what we also see in several of our studies. Some ravens eventually make it to the breeder state, and then it's about cooperating closely with your partner and potentially with some other individuals too. So then what we might find here is quite selective parts of cognition. And I think this is also kind of coordinate, it's reflected in our results again. So I have to say that, admit that we have to keep on going here to understand things a little bit better. But what I forgot to mention yet is, and I think this is the striking results in general, is that we always find quite huge individual variation and potentially specialization. And so what I'm becoming more and more interested in is there are kind of cognitive strategies, so that if ravens that are pretty good in the Machiavellian part are good or not so good in the cooperative part and these kind of things. And so what we want to look at in our current and also future project is having a closer look at this individual variation. On the one hand, in cognitive performance, on the other hand, in respect to information transmission between the birds. And we are currently running a project. It's the first one of this kind now, where we start with the early life effects. So the early experience on development, so the effects of early experience on the development of social competence. This project is led by Palmir Bouchari, a postdoc of mine. And the reason why I actually bring it up here is because I would like to introduce you now the new approach that I aim to do in the next couple of years, where we really combine the lab with the field in very intensively. So what we have in the build up is in the lab captive breeding colonies of 10 pairs, where we can do, for instance, brood manipulation. In this particular project, we allow all the birds to lay all their eggs, so they lay up to 6 eggs. When the last egg is laid, we go in and shake some eggs. So in this case, we can determine which chicks develop and hatch. And so in this way, we can also then determine the eventual family size. And so what we are creating, small families with 2 chicks and big families with 4 chicks. And we'll then allow the parents to raise the chicks, and we do a lot of behavioral samplings during that time. But then we take out all the chicks at the same day and take them away from the parents and transfer them to 2 new aviaries and house them in peer groups. And we take out and we house all these 2 siblings together. So there's the sips from small families, they stay together, but the sips from the big families, they're split into 2 too. And so in this period, then we ran behavioral and cognitive tests and can see how much the manipulation we did affects their behavior. And the ravens stay in this particular test situation only for 6 weeks. And then we open the doors and they get a GPS and they are allowed into free flight. So we can eventually have a look at the long-term consequences of our manipulations. And I have to say that things are working pretty well. So we are now in our 4th year of this manipulation. So now it's time to get some PhDs involved. And I'm happy to say that Avani Papat and Luca Han just accepted our offers. And so this is exactly what we are going to do in the near future to really push and see how much we can really get into the causational part now of the whole thing. And that's it already for me. Thanks very much for your attention. I'd also like to thank all my collaborators. I list here those that were working on the wild ravens, the zoos, and the funding organizations, and of course you for your attention. Thanks very much indeed.
Great. Thank you, Thomas. Well, this is very, very, very nice stuff, and because also common citizens are continuously asking for, and also in social media, for the skills. I mean, in Rome, I mean, we are in the Italian society. I mean, the behavior of the crows that are common now in town, so are always under attention. Recently, there was even there was in the news. You know that in the news they emphasize aspects even of aggression of people that have been attacked by crows or so every now and then in the news. So the topic of the social behavior of corvids is, and of gulls, I have to say, in Rome at least, because gulls are also interesting subjects. I don't know in Vienna, but in Rome they have been colonizing the town since already many years or so. Anyway, well, I have a question, but first of all, I would like to thank you and leave open the time for questions for the speakers. So if there are for the audience, if there are questions to Thomas, please don't be shy, because we have spread on the social also to students and people who are not fully in science or so about this also. So to make questions to Thomas about the ravens and corvids social skills and so. So are there any questions?
Eventually, you can also write in the chat the question, okay?
Yes, okay, good point. Yes. Okay.
Christina has one.
Well,
Christina has one.
Thank you for the very interesting talk. Really, actually, a very nice model system also. My question is about this helping behavior that they show. And I was wondering whether it's sort of reciprocal help, something like, you know, vampire bats and stuff like this. So is it only related to this social context or any other context as well?
We have in captivity, we can show that it's reciprocal, and they also reciprocate across context. So in captivity, they do. But then, you know, in captivity, you can always then argue this is a special situation with, in particular, the situation is stable. You don't have the dynamics in. So until recently, I would have been very, very careful in extrapolating from these kind of things from captive to field studies. But we're just analyzing 12-year data now on dominance relations, where we also were expecting not to be able to translate our captive data to the wild, because in the wild we have the dynamics, and we were sure that they don't form a linear rank hierarchy, but guess what? They do. And this is something which we are super surprised about. And we're now actually having a look at 3 years and then 10 years between, so 7 years between, and then another 3 years. And the results are always matching up. So I think it's too early to conclude anything. I can tell you in captivity, yes, in the wild, we don't know yet. We haven't looked at that yet.
Thank you.
Question from Donato
Good.
Sorano.
I see that it's Donato.
Yes, yes.
is a student.
Can you hear me? Can you
I
hear me?
do.
Okay.
I do
Okay.
hear you.
Okay. My question is about third-party interventions. I was curious about this kind of behaviors during conflicts, and what about third-party intervention during post-conflict interactions? Did you ever measure in these temporal windows behaviors like affiliations or consolations played by a bystander toward victims and or toward aggressors, and maybe if this is biased upon their value or of their social relationship?
Yes, yes. We did, but again, only in captivity. I collected the data a long time ago myself, and Ola Fraser analyzed it, and she could show in 2 different groups, one in the States, one in Austria, captive groups of ravens, that they do show what's called bystander affiliation or consolation. So if we then were using, so Ola was using her relationship quality categories and prediction based on that, and it actually was, so first of all, to your question, yes. So when they do the show consolation, so they show bystander affiliation, which we could interpret as consolation. So this way, they do this selectively, and they do this only with close kin when they were young, and when they're older with bonding partners. So this fits quite nicely. I thought that that's it, to be honest, because I thought that this is when they show this pattern in captivity in different groups across different continents, that this should be something we could generalize to the field. Haven't looked at it in the field yet, to be honest. I mean, we piloted, but it's difficult to get the sample size in a kind of a decent time period. That was the reason why I stopped doing it. But there are new studies. I think the study is forthcoming now from on Jackdaws by the group in Exeter, Alex Thornton's group, and they did field experiments, experimental tests on bystander affiliation, and couldn't find any. So they are questioning now if we are not anthropomorphizing too much with our observational data. And they might be right, but they might also be just using, so there are a lot of differences in the test design, and they were not looking at conflicts, but they were simulating intrusions by in the nest boxes by other males. So it could well be that the test birds didn't really understand what was going on here. So I think there are a couple of different ways how to interpret the results yet, but this actually that pushed me now to go out again and have a look on the bystander affiliation, consolation, post-conflict behavior in general on the wild ravens. And I think this will be one of the main aspects of one of the new PhDs who is going to start in 2 months. So I hope that in 3 years you can say more.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? If not, I have one. My question, Thomas, is about this apparently homogeneous, but maybe not, demographic category of what you called at the beginning of your talk of non-breeders. So of course this, it might be that they will be breeder at some points or not. This is one question. So which kind of individuals belong to the category of non-breeder, and which role do they play in the raven community?
So that's exactly that's a tough question. That's exactly why we actually are having this main objective to understand the social structure better. So what the ravens do, as many other corvids, is that they, from a theoretical point of view, the way it works is when they are immature, they team up with others for foraging and for roosting. So they form the non-breeder groups. When they are sexually mature, they pair up, find a pair partner, go to a defended territory and become breeders and stay territorial and stay out of business with the other ravens. That's what you can read in the literature about corvids in general, the territorial breeding modes at least. And this might be the case. I mean, there are also a lot of studies, empirical studies backing this up. In ravens, however, those studies have all been done on populations where the ravens have been wiped out or have been critically endangered, and where they did really introduction programs or where they are monitoring the population for other reasons. So basically populations that are expanding. Of course, if there is a lot of space and you grow up and you find a partner, then it's not a big problem for you to find a garden where you can actually claim your territory then. So in human terms, buy a house with a small garden. So this is not a problem, but however, in the alpine situation, the population is saturated. So there are hardly any territory that's available. So what the birds do, they stay long in the non-breeder groups. And that's exactly why we find a rather high proportion of adult birds in the non-breeder groups. Like I said, we have a couple of birds that are between 10 and 15 years old because we marked them in 2008 when they were in the first year, which we can say for sure. And now we are 21. And at that time, we had also marked a couple of them that were already a little bit older, where we can only guess their age. But so this is what I can say. I don't know how much you can generalize these kind of things, but at least if the population is saturated, as we have in the Northern Alps, and I would say it's in the alpine situation, because our ravens go between Germany and Italy within 2 months if they want to. So I think it's not something special about this Austrian area. Then I think the situation that we describe is quite normal. We also actually had a look at some data from Italy, from the Fragrania region where the vultures are fed, and the pattern. So these were observations, and the patterns were very, very similar to what we have in the northern part of the Alps. And we also analyzed some GPS data from French colleagues in Massif Central, where the patterns again were very similar to ours. So this suggests it's not an alpine thing, but a Middle European thing that what we can describe here. Now to the non-breeder question about what is a non-breeder. I completely agree. This is a term which is basically an umbrella term for, as it says actually, for everyone who is non-breeding. And because they're non-breeding, they can be much more mobile. And this is also what they are in general. However, the surprising thing is that quite some of them, so 1/3 actually are not mobile at all, and another third is only a little bit mobile. And so only 1/3 is highly mobile, at least again. And now our sample size in general, I forgot to mention this, is I think we have now caught and individually tagged, also marked more than 500 birds. And about 100 of them have GPS tags. So I think the sample sizes that we are working on are now quite substantial, or substantial enough to draw some conclusions. And yeah, I also think that, so what I can always show, and here the data is a little bit scarce, also still shaky, I have to admit, is that they compete strongly about territories. So we have behavioral data on that already. And they don't, so the tenure basically they have of keeping a territory is not as long as we thought. So I think, and this depends again, and this is not now my proposal or my hypothesis, I have to say that this very much correlates with how many non-breeders are around. When there are many non-breeders around, you don't hold your territory so long. If you are somewhere in nowhere, of course you can stay there forever. This is kind of an obvious thing, I would say, but still needs to be shown as well. And what's also something of, I would say, quite interesting, something what you hardly read in the literature, is that the territorials, once they become territorials, it doesn't mean that they stay in the territory all the time. They stay in the territory for sure for breeding, This is a time period where there is a no-go for them to go because they have to defend it heavily against the others. But when the breeding is done, now in summer and in fall, they do show up at the non-breeder groups, and it's really cool because there are some days where you can see 10 breeders, all of them in the same tree, sitting next to each other and checking each other, either checking each other out, so saying hi to each other, or saying I'm still around, or I don't know what they do there. But what's even cooler is that they are at the foraging, so they meet at the foraging sites, but they hardly join during foraging. They just go there for social reasons, not for feeding. And those are the ones also that are heavily involved in breaking up the affiliation patterns of the young guys. So it's partially territorials and partially all the guys in the non-breeder groups.
I follow with two just short questions, curiosities maybe. The first one is, what is the reproductive senescence of these animals, at least in the field of what you know about it? And the second one, if there is extra pair paternity in, or they are social, or they are really true monogamous.
I have to admit that I really cannot answer fully those questions yet because we are not there yet. First of all, the downside of our study site is that it's very difficult to get full access on the breeders there when they're breeding. So it's very difficult to climb the nests. We are working together with the mountain rescue team. So it's not that we are climbing, it's the professionals who are climbing. But still, when we start out with, let's say, 15 nests in the beginning, then we eventually can make 2 or 3 per year, if at all. And this is because they breed on cliffs. Those cliffs are very dangerous because they are very soft. And so it's some cannot be climbed, at least some nest sites cannot be climbed, some can be climbed, but the issue there is then it's the winter situation. They start building the nests in February and breed in March, and we have typically snow and the threat of avalanches until May, also April, May in the breeding grounds. So this is the main problem. So we are using drones now to check the nests, so to determine fledging success, but we cannot, also we can hardly mark the young ones in the nests. We can do some, but not all of them. So in expect extra pair paternity, it's eventually the data pour in, but it takes much more time as normal with other study systems. And so what we are basically relying on is catching the young ones eventually when they leave their parents, then they're a little bit naive still, and it's quite easy for them. So it's quite, those are the ones that we quite easy to get into our traps, let's put it this way. And then we do the genetics, and in this way then actually find out who is sibling with whom. And in this respect, the genetics is something that we are also working on, because we have so far used up to 15 markers, but some of them didn't work out. So they only have one allele or whatever. So that it actually boiled down to 8 to 10 markers that were working very reliably. So this is enough to give us a rough picture, but it's not good for going into detailed questions. So we are now doing a complete new analysis for all 400 or something caught birds, and using different techniques, but don't ask me what. I gave this to the postdoc and said to redo it. So we try to come up with a more fine-grained analysis so that we can tackle questions like these in the near future. Too early at the moment.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Thomas. Are there any other questions? Ci sono altre domande? Se qualcuno deve fare domande in italiano, le posso tradurre io, eh? Non mi sembra. Seems there's not any more questions. Well, if there are not any more questions, I now close the talk. I thank you really very much on behalf of the board of the Italian Society of Ethology. Thomas, I see it is very warm in Italy, in Vienna as well. In Rome, there is a little wind from the sea. So from my window here, it is, at least there is a bit of wind also, but it is warm, but it's manageable at the moment. But so anyway, if there are not any more questions, I consider this meeting finished. Se ci sono domande, io considero il seminario chiuso. Ringrazio Thomas BUGNYAR e comunque gli uditori, diciamo, se ci fossero domande che vengano in mente, diciamo, più tardi, eccetera, possono anche scrivermi personalmente o insomma, e comunque il seminario è stato registrato. Grazie a tutti. Lascio la parola, se c'è qualcuno, al gestore, diciamo, di Zoom, che è Christian, se è tornato, e possiamo chiudere. Christian, ci sei?
Sì, posso spegnere.
Sì, perfetto.
Salve.
Allora, un abbraccio a tutti.